US president has declared that events in Ukraine mark the beginning of a Russian invasion. In the last 24 hours, world leaders have begun ramping up economic sanctions. They hope that punishing Russia for sending troops into Ukraine's east will be enough to avert all-out war. Tough new measures targeting Russian officials, oligarchs, banks and companies have been rolled out around the globe, from the United States to Europe and the Asia-Pacific. And it's likely just the beginning. The United States has also announced it's moving more troops and military equipment to Eastern Europe. Tonight we'll have reports from Kiev, Washington DC and Canberra. We begin our coverage with North American correspondent Jade McMillan in the US capital.
Women and children leave rebel-held parts of eastern Ukraine under the threat of war. Some have welcomed the Russian president's decision to recognise the two breakaway regions, but Western leaders are united in their condemnation.
He's setting up a rationale to go much further. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The US has accused Russia of violating international law, announcing a new set of sanctions aimed at targeting two state-owned financial institutions, preventing the Russian government from accessing Western finance and penalising 5 Russian elites and their families.
They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well.
As part of a coordinated response, the UK has also slapped sanctions on Russian banks and oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin.
I hope that he steps back from the brink and does not conduct a full invasion. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we must implement the tough package that we put forward.
Germany has delivered one of the strongest blows, shelving the multi-billion-dollar Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a project that would have delivered huge amounts of Russian gas into Europe.
Close to 80 years after the end of World War II, there is the danger of a war in Eastern Europe. It is our job to avert such a catastrophe, and I appeal again to Russia to help in the process.
The US is describing these sanctions as a first round, deliberately holding back on further, more severe measures for now in the hope of deterring a full-scale invasion. But Western leaders are warning their response will escalate in line with Russia's activity.
The world must respond with all its economic might to punish Russia for the crimes it has already committed and ahead of the crimes it plans to commit.
The US Secretary of State has cancelled a scheduled meeting with his Russian counterpart, and any hope of a summit between Presidents Biden and Putin has been dashed.
Our world is facing the biggest global peace and security crisis in recent years. We face a moment that I sincerely hope would not come.
A moment, the UN says, that will test the global community. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Washington.
Australia has also announced a new round of sanctions against Russia, and the Prime Minister has put Australian companies on alert, warning that Moscow could retaliate by unleashing global cyber attacks. Scott Morrison spoke to his Ukrainian counterpart this evening, saying Australia stands ready to do more. From Canberra, here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
How are Australia's sanctions going to make a difference to Russia?
Moscow's man in Canberra uncharacteristically mute
How concerned are you?
after being summoned to explain his president's intimidation.
There must be consequences for Russia's actions.
Europe's teetering on the edge of its biggest security crisis since World War II. Fury with Vladimir Putin spilling into the streets on both sides of the Atlantic. Disgust with Russia's Ukraine incursion global.
They're behaving like thugs and bullies.
Scott Morrison unveiling a new wave of travel and economic sanctions against Russian banks, institutions and individuals, including 8 members of Moscow's Security Council who signed off on the invasion of Ukraine, and Russian oligarchs who flourished under President Putin's menacing rule. Australian banks put on alert for suspicious transactions.
Those who are financing, profiting from an autocratic and authoritarian regime that is invading its neighbour should have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide.
We do offer our full bipartisan support.
Internationally coordinated penalties designed to unstitch Putin's power structure. Western intelligence monitoring Russia's troop build-up from above.
Russia is at peak readiness to now complete a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that is likely to occur within the next 24 hours.
Ukrainians are prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, and because they have in the past and they will now.
The Ukrainian community calling on the Australian government to do more.
I think it's now time to provide lethal military assistance.
Ukraine may ask for foreign firepower, but it's unlikely to get direct military support from the US, NATO allies or Australia. That leaves sanctions as the West's last best hope for Russian retreat. And they don't come without risk of retaliation from Putin, who can still project pain far and wide through cyber attacks, a global fuel price crisis, and by sending refugees fleeing in their thousands. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Our Europe correspondent Nick Dole is in Kiev. Nick, what's the reaction been in Ukraine to these new sanctions on Russia?
Good evening, Juanita. Well, Ukraine says the sanctions are a good start, but it says there should be more in reserve. It's especially pleased with Germany's decision to shelve this multi-billion-dollar Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. That pipeline is already built, and that decision will have a real cost, not just for Russia, but potentially it could put the price of energy up in Western Europe. But Ukraine says it's those sort of tough decisions that need to be taken by the international community to stand up to Russia. Whether or not there are more sanctions to come will depend largely on Moscow's next move. We haven't seen any evidence of a large-scale troop deployment since Vladimir Putin declared independence for these two breakaway regions in the country's east, the entire regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. And for people in those areas, life is getting increasingly dangerous.
A now familiar sound in Luhansk in eastern Ukraine.
I don't feel safe. I have a bad feeling.
Houses and this power plant on the Ukrainian-controlled side were in the firing line as more shelling forced people into bomb shelters.
You only think about how to survive one more night. You can't even think about the future.
Now that Vladimir Putin has officially recognised the entire Donbas region, he can openly send more forces there, but he remains tight-lipped about his plans.
It is generally not possible to predict actions. It all depends on the specific situations that develop on the ground.
Satellite images suggest Russia is continuing its military build-up around Ukraine. This is a new deployment of more than 100 military vehicles and dozens of troop tents in southern Belarus on Ukraine's northern border. On the diplomatic front, Russia is also making moves. It says it's withdrawing embassy staff from Ukraine for their own safety. Moscow's mission in Kiev is mostly shuttered, but someone was inside and they appeared to be burning something. Out the front, a dark message had been left. The labels on the crosses suggest they were reserved for invading Russian soldiers. Russia has continued its verbal assault on Ukraine as a state, the foreign minister saying it doesn't deserve to be considered sovereign at all. While language like that is mostly targeted at a domestic audience, it's making Ukrainians even more defiant. The country's leader has called up some military reservists for what he calls a special period of time.
Ukrainians are a peaceful nation. We want silence. But if we keep silent today, we will disappear tomorrow.
Roman Nabozhniak runs a brownie cafe in Kiev. But he used to be a Ukrainian soldier in Donbas, and now, as a reservist, he's ready to roll up his sleeves.
So I have 24 hours to come to my military base and take my weapons and join the army.
And how do you feel about doing that?
I'm waiting for it. Because once again, I have to explain that we treat it as an opportunity to finish this business.
This war, he says, is a battle between Ukraine's Soviet past and its modern future. Nick Dole, ABC News, Kiev.